watching the videos, and we were hearing about everything happening to our community, and we kind of just reached a boiling point. And it was just like, okay, we have platforms. That was really when we started talking, and then when this started happening, we were like, what do we do? And that's how all this got started.
Hello, and welcome to another installment of our Race in America series at Washington Post Live. I'm Nicole Dungca, an investigative reporter here at the Washington Post. My guest today says that the easiest way to introduce someone's culture is through their food. Chef Tim Ma now joins us to talk a little bit about his journey with his restaurants and also fighting violence and bias against Asian American Pacific Islander communities through his nonprofit. Thank you so much for joining us, Chef Tim.
Thanks a lot for having me today.
So let's get started. You recently opened up a restaurant called Any Day Now in DC's Navy Yard. Can you tell us a little bit about it and how it's different from other restaurants you've opened?
Yeah, we really set out to open an all-day restaurant, and um, really we set out to open a restaurant and like a dinner restaurant. And what happened was that we were like, okay, we need to figure out this all-day component. And instead of your typical cafe that has all these things, we were like, let's be really good at one thing. And express everything through this one medium, and that one medium became these scallion pancake egg sandwiches. And we spent a good amount of time, probably too much time, developing that a single sandwich, and our inspiration being McDonald's was also like a little bit unorthodox. Um, but then when we started to taste it and we started to have other people taste it, we knew that we were onto something. And when we opened, it just kind of exploded to uh, a breakfast restaurant, I guess, that had lines out the door and still does to this day on the weekends, for these scallion pancake egg sandwiches. And so we, we are on that goal to open that dinner portion of the restaurant that happens literally next week. So we're pretty excited to finally get to that goal, but we're very happy with what we have so far.
That's really exciting. And of course, everyone is loving these scallion pancake breakfast sandwiches. Can you talk a little bit more about why scallion pancakes in particular, why breakfast in particular?
I mean, it really leans into pretty much everything that I've done since the pandemic has been centered around an exploration of being Asian in America, and especially with like Lucky Danger and Laoban dumplings. That's just really everything that I've been doing on the culinary side, and a lot of my team members are really into the Asian cuisine as well. And so when I mentioned, hey, like this is the one thing that we're going to be good at, they just took off and ran with it. And it's a little bit of a different medium, and you think about it, it's sausage, egg, and cheese, but we take some really good care of the scallion pancakes, so we're really happy with it so far.
It's a combination of my favorite dishes, so I'm all over it. But
Yeah.
you talked a little bit about Lucky Danger, which a lot of people may know you from. And on that website, it actually says American Chinese by a Chinese American. Can you talk a little bit about what that phrase means to you?
Yeah, it's a pretty important tagline, though. Seems very simple, but has a lot of depth to it if you think about it. So, American Chinese food, which is what I would consider different from Chinese food, but probably one of the most popular cuisines in all of America, um, has really been the same ever since my entire family has run a restaurant. So like ever since my family has been running restaurants, not much has changed in American Chinese food. I would say a lot has changed in Chinese food in America, but with this particular cuisine. And so that was kind of the mission and the vision when we started Lucky Danger, was to take the perspective of a professional chef. I didn't grow up in Chinese kitchens. I didn't grow up in my family's restaurants. I was an engineer for a long time, and then, but taking and so I was French trained because there are really only like French cooking schools here. And so taking the perspective of what I learned as a professional chef in French and American kitchens and putting a fresh take on the American Chinese cuisine, looking at it from how we source to the techniques that we apply to it, even though they're a little bit opposite of French cuisine. And then just like kind of taking apart the cuisine and the dishes of the cuisine and putting them back together with the way that we know how to cook. Um, and maybe giving it a look from somebody who grew up Chinese in America, and applying that to the American Chinese cuisine. So it's been a fun exploration so far, and for sure not over. There's still a lot of work to be done.
How do you feel like what you're doing is challenging the perception that people might have about Chinese cuisine in America?
I think American Chinese cuisine started with Chinese dishes that have like, I guess what some people would say, strange flavors. And then those dishes got Americanized. And and now what we're trying to do is maybe do that same process over again and take some of the food that I grew up eating, being a Chinese person in America. Like I was born in America. I wasn't um, born in China or Taiwan and then came over here. And so uh, I grew up eating a particular style of food that was kind of just like a mix mash of American food and Chinese food, and trying to introduce those dishes slowly. Just like now, what we know is like kung pao chicken or General Tso's chicken that are ingrained into American Chinese cuisine, and see if we can introduce what the next kung pao or General Tso's chicken is.
Yeah, it seems very uniquely Asian American, and that's so exciting for me as somebody who's also Asian American. I do want to talk a little bit about your nonprofit, Chefs Stopping AAPI Hate. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how this idea came about and how you feel like it's evolved since 2021.
Yeah, so back in 2020 when the pandemic hit, being a restaurateur, it wasn't the greatest time to be in restaurants. So many of my concepts and my fellow chefs and restaurateurs' concepts had to close. There was really, and it was really an interesting time when everybody was trying to figure out how to be a restaurateur in a time where there could be no restaurants. And so we were spending the time, with that word pivoting, we were pivoting left and right to whatever we can do to, for one, just like survive um, as a food business, but also still keep many employees employed during a time that it wasn't, there weren't many things to do. And so there are many creative solutions, obviously, like take home meal kits or World Central Kitchen was pivotal in putting a lot of restaurants to work to supply food for those that in communities that needed the food supplied to them. And then obviously, like figuring out pivoting a fine dining restaurant into a takeout restaurant was very challenging. And then the other interesting thing that happened, and I think this happened for a lot of people in a lot of industries, is that we slowed down and we started to look at what was important to us, as it related to us personally, but as it related to what we were doing professionally. And that's where like this exploration into Chinese culture and Chinese food in America started to take hold. But then as we started to see the anti-Asian incidents happen on TV, and especially those closed circuit videos that were really fuzzy of elderly Asian Americans being attacked, it started to really hit a nerve. And obviously Kevin is a good friend and a fellow chef, and so we would talk every day. It was kind of like okay, for one, what do we do with our restaurants? What are you doing? How can we help? And then secondly was, do you see all these things happening? Like, uh, God, it's pretty terrible. That looks like my mom. That looks like my grandmother. That looks, like my father. Um, and so as that started to escalate, um, our feelings of responsibility towards it started to escalate. So like that feeling of responsibility of being a community leader, um, like it wasn't like, oh, we should do something. It was like, oh, we have to do something. And so, and our skill set is cooking. So we were trying to figure out, okay, how can we use cooking to fight anti-Asian hate? And we realized that we sell food for our businesses. Why can't we sell food for those nonprofit organizations on the front line fighting anti-Asian hate? And so that's where it really started, and that idea translated into the only thing that we can do in 2021 was takeout dinners. And so that's how the series started, was a single takeout dinner here in Washington, D.C.
And we're all thankful that you were able to give us all that great takeout. And I mean, now the nonprofit works with more than 200 chefs, a lot of them Michelin level. I mean, what was it like seeing this esteemed community really come and rally around this issue that was so important to you and also to AAPI communities?
Yeah, that first takeout dinner was five pretty prominent Asian American chefs here in DC. Uh, and then really what happened overnight was that we got on the phone and started texting and calling just fellow chefs. And a lot of these chefs weren't Asian American. They were just chefs that were in the community that, we consider friends, that were just like reaching out to us, or us reaching out to them. And they're like, how can we help? Um, and we are like, you know what, let's just keep going. Why don't we get another five chefs together? They don't have to be Asian American. And it just started to bloom like that. And so all of a sudden, from this one dinner with five chefs became 45 chefs here in DC, and nine dinners, and a lot of them mostly not Asian American. So we're like, okay, like, it felt really good to see other communities come and stand by our community. um, and of course, being entrepreneurs and restaurateurs, what do? You're like, okay, well, we got something, let's do more. So, let's reach out to other cities. So obviously, we have a network of chefs in other cities. So we reached out to chefs in many cities, not just the ones that we partnered in, New York, San Francisco, and Detroit, but there were chefs in Denver, there were chefs in New Orleans, there were chefs in Miami. Um, and it was really, we were mobilizing so quickly. This was happening in a matter of days, which typically these things take weeks or months to plan. So these other cities were, and we had a lot of really good volunteers and help in other cities to really mobilize and get the same thing that we're doing in DC and doing happening in other cities. And what was the greatest about that was, um, we took a portion of the proceeds and donated them to national anti-Asian hate nonprofits like Stop AAPI Hate. But also we were like, take the rest of the proceeds and donate it into nonprofits directly in your community. And so that was really great to see how many people rallied around that.
Yeah, I'd love to talk more about the Storefront Emergency Fund, which is something that was started up through this. Can you tell us how it's helping people within the community?
Yeah, really, we realize, and this happens to actually like our restaurants as well, and you saw it a lot where Asian American businesses, not just restaurants, were getting vandalized, and really just because they were Asian, which is kind of disheartening that we're in 2023 and that's still happening. And so, really, that was one of the things, because we know as restaurateurs how hard it is when something like that happens. Just say a simple window is broken. Um, when that happens, we have to go through insurance. It's not always, there's always a deductible. There's always, hoops that you have to jump through to get your store back to what it was. And so, really, we established that fund to try and bridge that gap. And so, to get that business back up and running as soon as possible. And so, really, just using our experiences from what we have like gone through, and hopefully being able to help in that way that we know that they need help in.
Wow, that's a great resource. And in the past, you've actually talked about how your mother, has some different thoughts on responding to anti-API hate. You've said that she comes from a generation that says you should put your head down, don't speak up, don't make trouble. Something that I think a lot of Asian American Pacific Islander immigrants and their children might, argue or talk about. Can you talk a little bit about that generational divide and how you see it playing out in communities?
Yeah, it's still an argument that rages to this day. Um, and I know, a lot of Asian Americans in my generation probably experience the same thing, and it's not without argument from my parents' side. I mean, they grew up in a time where it was probably truly life or death. Not to say that it's not now, but uh, we can't discount the experiences that they went through as pioneers to come into a country where they didn't speak the language or didn't look like anybody else, and especially my family landing in Arkansas in the '70s of all places. For sure, they experienced things that were very difficult, and so for the safety of themselves and their children was to avoid trouble um and for our generation and like what we look at now, or let me back up and just give you kind of like the example of the generation divide in my personal experience was when the January 6th incidents were happening. Lucky Danger pop up was 4 blocks away from the Capitol. And so all I heard were sirens and trying to keep up with what was going on. And we had a sold out set of to go meals going that night. Um, and I'm on a family group chat, and my mom is saying, close the restaurant, return everybody's money, get out of DC as soon as possible. If you run into anybody, hide your face, don't let them see that you're Asian so you don't get hurt, and get out back to Virginia. And I understood that, right? Like the important thing is the safety. Whereas my sister, who is 2 years older than me, on that same text thread was, no, screw that. Like, take off your mask, show them your face, and like now's the time to stand up and fight. And so, I was caught in between that conversation, but it really shows the just the gap that's between us. And it's not that my parents don't believe in what we're doing, because they understand that what we do now and what we fight for now sets the stage for our my children and their grandchildren to not have to deal with what we've dealt with. And it's still not true. Like my children still deal with biases that they shouldn't at this time, but it just makes the fight that much more important.
Wow, that's a really powerful story. And I'd love to get to your upbringing in Arkansas soon, but I also want to talk a little bit about a letter to your parents that was on the menu of your former restaurant, American Son. And I want to read part of it here. It says, you taught us a language you did not know, fed us food you could not cook, and immersed us in a culture you did not understand. And with that, we became American, though we looked worlds apart. I know you would have introduced us to other Chinese people as my American son to explain why I couldn't speak Chinese, why I didn't know our culture, or why I didn't like our food. But I am proud of who you have allowed me to become. Can you unpack this for me? It's very beautiful. Who do you feel like you have become?
Um, well, the name of that restaurant was American Son, and really from that story, my mom introducing me to other Chinese people as my American son. And again, when I told this story to the founder of Eaton, the hotel that restaurant was in, she said, it doesn't matter what you do in that restaurant. That is the name of the restaurant. And that is the narrative that we run with. And it's funny. It's just like I don't speak Chinese. I didn't know much about the culture. I didn't know much about my family's history. And it was really because, in Arkansas, like the more that they pushed us towards being quote unquote American, just like the food, right? Like we became Americanized. With that, if we fit in, we know the culture, we don't have accents, we don't smell like garlic when we get to school, which was like a real thing. Um, that we wouldn't have rocks thrown at us on the way to school, but we still had rocks thrown at us every day on the way to school. Um, but with that, like I lost my culture, and I think now is it's really paying homage and a testament to the strength of my parents, whether they did that intentionally or not, to really give us the best chance for success. Um, and now it's we're going in the other direction where it's like, okay, like let me like recapture the culture, let me stand up for the culture, because it is something that's slowly eroding away in America. And so we want to make sure that we pay respect to that.
Wow, that's really powerful. I mean, your family immigrated from Taiwan to Arkansas, as you said, and had a Chinese restaurant. And then at 30, you left a career of as being an engineer, an immigrant parent's dream, and went into the culinary industry. What was that like, explaining that to your parents, and how do they feel about it now?
Yeah, it wasn't easy. Still not easy to this day, despite quote unquote perceived success. But um, yeah, my parents and my parents' entire generation came to America and worked as hard as they could in industries or whatever job that they could find to chase their American dream, which was work hard, save money, put our kids through American university, and have them be successful in America, become lawyer, doctor, engineer, or whatever profession. I just happened to become an engineer, and the American dream was complete for my parents. They were, that's what they worked so hard for. And um, when I told them that I was going to open a restaurant in the middle of my successful engineer career, I now look back on it and understand it's a slap in the face to their dream, right? Just like my dream's to open a restaurant, um, or was to open a restaurant, and so uh, to go from what can be stable to an industry that is notoriously and historically very unstable was very hard for them, which probably made me work that much harder to become successful in this industry. But yeah, chasing two different dreams on the complete polar opposite sides. But it's been great. They were, despite them objecting to me opening a restaurant, they were there on day one helping me open the restaurant.
That's amazing. And earlier you were talking a little bit about the bias you felt in Arkansas growing up. Um, what was that like seeing, incidents of anti-API violence now as an adult? And how did that really connect with you in terms of making you think about your earlier experiences?
Yeah, I always say that those experiences in Arkansas really um, formed who I am or how I experience being Asian in America now because I experienced it. And now seeing it really produces a visceral reaction in me, probably because of, you know, the trauma that was associated with something like that. And the incidents like, walking to school. And I still remember, I don't remember much about Arkansas, um, just very, some significant moments and some moments that don't seem significant. But I remember the tunnel that me and my sister, this is again back in the 70s, we just walked to school. And I remember us having to walk to school because my parents would have to go to work early. So we walked to school and we went through this tunnel. And the other side of the tunnel always sat kids that would throw rocks at us. Or like my sister and I, our bedroom faced the street. That's just happened to be the configuration of the house. And, one night a brick came through the window. I didn't even know it was a brick. I just heard glass crashing, froze, scared out of our mind. No idea what time it was. And my parents woke up to us still in that state and discovering a brick came through the window and not knowing till much later that the reason that a brick was thrown through our window was because of the way we looked. Um, and so, yeah, it was when I now think back that I had gone through those experiences, when I see that happen to other people in other forms of Asian hate, just produces that visceral reaction. That probably is what drives us to continue the work that we're doing now.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I mean, you've said in the past many times that sharing your culture is through food. I mean, when did that start for you as somebody who did go through that bias and grew up knowing that there were people who were not open to those cultures? When did you start showing people your culture through your food?
Yeah. So again, I went to French cooking school, and so that's all I knew. I didn't cook. I didn't grow up in the restaurants. I didn't, sit by my grandfather and cook with him, which I now probably regret a little bit. Um, but so when I got into restaurants and started cooking again, like after being an engineer, all I knew was what I was taught, and so I was cooking that way for I guess the first like 10 to 12 years of my career, and um, but I would always pull in the influence of how I was grown up. So I'd always throw in like a Chinese ingredient or a Chinese accent, and or like give a perspective um, to French or American food with like a Chinese accent. And it wasn't until um, really right before the pandemic when my family had an exhibit go up in the Smithsonian American History Museum that started to be like, why can't I do that food at this level? And so that is really what just like sent me on this exploration of that, and that's why you see that everything that pretty much happened after 2019, everything that I did with food was always around Chinese food or Asian American food. Um, and really because it's okay, like now the platform that I have, why can't it be Asian food or Chinese food? And so that's really the path that like this is not that far that long ago. We're still real time like exploring this, and I hope we go deeper with it to bring more of the culture because the culture is expressed through food first. So I hope that continues.
Yeah, you've said in the past that the women in your family are the gatekeepers to the food and your family history. Can you talk a little bit more about that? You were just saying it in the last question, but that connection between food and family and culture.
Yeah, food, family, and culture for sure. And again, the introduction to someone else's culture is typically through food first. Um, and yeah, it's always seemed to be the women. So it was, my grandmother was really held all the family stories. Um, and I remember we would sit around and make pot stickers every Sunday in New York. Uh, and they would just sit around and tell family stories, and you know then I remember my mom became that steward of all the family stories, and now continues to tell them to us now, and so we're trying to really absorb as much as we can, just because there's so much family history, some of it good and obviously some of it bad, but it's all stuff that we need to take in. But and a lot of it actually centers on food and centers around the restaurants, not just my restaurants, but my my parents' restaurant, my uncle's restaurant. Um, and I love that. And it's really still a good way for the family to connect.
And you've opened and closed a few restaurants over the years. I mean, what has that process taught you? You know, you've talked about how it isn't the most stable of industries, but what have you learned through this whole journey?
Yeah, it's really a lot of resilience. So I think about, even the stories of growing up in Arkansas, right? It's taught me a different level of resilience. And for sure, the restaurant industry has taught me a level of resilience and being able to have challenges like come up every day. Um, and show me a way to like handle the challenges calmly, sometimes calmly, um, uh, but a way to be able to be like, okay, like I can take in anything that comes at us and turn it into something good or use it to learn. And I always say I don't trust too many people who haven't failed, because failure just teaches us so much. And so, you know, in the moment, I'm not thankful for the failures when they're failing, but when I look back on them, the failures have really set me up for where
And I'm sure we have a lot of foodies who are tuning in. Who are some of your personal inspirations in terms of chefs and restaurants that you've really looked toward while you were building your own restaurants?
I am. Yeah, for sure, it's changed a lot over time. Um, I think I listened to Sean Sherman on this and him talking about he came from a time where cookbooks were the inspiration. So I come from a similar time period where my connection to chefs were through their cookbooks, and so I certainly have over the years looked up upon a lot of chefs like Thomas Keller and people like that. Over time, uh, well, one of the first Chinese cookbooks that I ever got, and this was I don't know maybe a decade ago, was Grace Young's. first cookbook, and I'm sorry, I'm like blanking on the name of it right now. Um, and I used that as a reference because it for one, had such beautiful recipes that were so close to like how I grew up eating, but then also telling the story of why the food was that way. Um, and I referenced that book for many many years to the point that like I think it does have like all kinds of soy sauce stains and stuff like that on it. But then just several years ago, got to meet Grace Young and discover the work that she's been doing for the Asian American community as well. So um, for sure, has always been an inspiration through a cookbook, but now been an inspiration in real life, and really work hard to support her work with like the Support Chinatowns campaign, just because it's such an important piece of our culture through food.
Great. And as we close, I want to quote a post that you shared on Instagram. It said, "We believe that experiencing amazing food has the ability to transport, evoke, reminisce, or introduce you to something new entirely." I mean, what effect does food have on you?
I think food just really allows somebody to cross the bridge with the path of least resistance sometimes, because everybody shares passion over food, and it's just something that we do every day. Um and so I really appreciate like how it could, for one, bring people together to the table who probably would not get together, and share common passions over something like food, but also it allows you to really start the conversation about that other person's culture, and it allows you to learn something that you may not have learned or asked about through any other way. So it's just really something that I think, you know, like on the back burner, it's something that we really need to appreciate a little bit more, and I hope that's happening as we talk.
And for anyone who hasn't been to one of your restaurants, what must they absolutely try?
For sure, this Scallion pancake egg sandwich right now, if you can make it here in person in DC. But if you're not here in DC, certainly Laoban dumplings, the dumplings that are in grocery stores, are all over the United States. So you can find them in a lot of grocery stores, 2,000 grocery stores across the U.S. and hopefully counting.
Great. Well, that is all the time we have today. Thank you so much, Chef Tim Ma. This has been such a wonderful conversation, and I really appreciate you being here with me. And
Thank you so much for having me.
of course. And thanks to all of you for watching. To see more of what we have to offer, please go to WashingtonPostLive.com and register for some upcoming programs. Once again, I'm Nicole Dungca from the Washington Post, and thanks for joining us.